All right, so ever notice how some movies, they're pure fun, right? Like popcorn throwing, explosions galore entertainment. But then some, they kind of leave you with these lingering questions like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah, you're left scratching your head a bit.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into one of those Michael Bay's 2007 Transformers. But hold on, we're not here to debate if it's a cinematic masterpiece or not.
It's more about the does it make sense factor.
Exactly. Does it hold up under a microscope, so to speak?
And that's where our source, a Spanish language critique, comes in.
Oh, this critique, it really goes there.
It dissects the movie's logic, or should we say the lack of it sometimes?
They don't pull any punches. Okay, so we've got giant robots, good versus evil, fate of the world, hanging in the balance, you know the drill. You'd think,
Yeah.
straightforward, right?
You'd think so.
But this critique points out how jarring it is to go from this epic universe-spanning backstory to, bam, a desert showdown. Like, how did we get here?
It's a matter of pacing. The source even wonders, is it intentional? Like, bombard the audience with so much visual spectacle that they don't have time to ask, hold on, what's going on?
Overload the senses before the brain can catch up.
Exactly.
Sneaky, sneaky. Okay, then we meet Sam Witwicky, our average teenager, who's suddenly the key to everything. The critique points out how much the movie emphasizes his normal, life-awkward teachers, bullies, the works. And it's like, this feels kind of out of place next to, giant robots and global annihilation.
It creates this tonal dissonance that the critique highlights throughout the film. Like, how do you balance goofy teenage comedy with, the possible end of the world?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to strike.
Transformers doesn't always quite stick the landing.
And speaking of things not quite adding up, Sam's car buying experience. This is where the critique really digs in. So he goes to buy a car, right? And this shady salesman is practically begging him to take this beat-up Camaro.
And it just gets weirder from there. Our source points out all these little head-scratcher moments, like, why is Sam's friend just randomly hanging upside down during this pivotal scene?
I never noticed that.
And why does none of this feel like a normal transaction even before the robots come into play?
It's played for laughs, but the critique argues that those laughs, they actually undercut the tension the movie is trying to build. Almost like it can't decide silly action flick or serious sci-fi threat.
Exactly. And this inconsistency, it pops up again with Megatron, the big bad himself. He keeps letting Sam escape.
So much for a menacing villain.
Right. It's like, come on, Megatron. Our source points out that it's a classic villain trope, sure, but does it really serve the story in this case?
It makes you wonder if Megatron actually wants to conquer Earth or if he's just toying with this kid.
Exactly. And it's not just nitpicking. The critique makes us ask, does falling back on these tropes actually make the villain less intimidating, less believable?
Less of a threat. Less scary.
Exactly.
It makes you think twice about rooting for the good guys when the bad guy seems kind of incompetent. Speaking of good guys, we got to talk Optimus Prime. He transforms into this very specific Peterbilt truck, which the critique points out kind of clashes with what we learn about Transformers in later movies.
Yeah, that's a big challenge with franchises, isn't it? Keeping things consistent. What's a cool visual choice in one film might contradict established lore down the line.
Continuity is key.
Exactly.
They didn't have the whole saga planned out from the start. Shocking. But, okay, before we get too deep into the lore, let's talk about the military. They're all over this movie. What's the critique's take on how those scenes play out?
Well, it's interesting. Transformers, it both uses and subverts typical military tropes.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got these moments of genuine tension, like when the soldiers realize just what they're up against.
Oh, yeah, that scene where that whole base gets wiped out.
Exactly, pure chaos.
Terrifying.
But then as the critique points out, it gets almost absurdly funny at times.
Like that scene where they're trying to call for backup in the middle of a robot invasion, and the phone operator asks for a credit card number.
It's hilarious, but also...
Right. You'd think they'd have a hotline for this sort of thing. And that ties into another point the critique brings up, which is, how do you even begin to cover up a battle of this scale? Giant robots duking it out in the city.
It's a logistical nightmare that the movie kind of glosses over.
Yeah, like just sweep it under the rug, folks. Nothing to see here.
Exactly. Maybe it's part of what makes it fun to watch, suspending our disbelief. But it does make you wonder if they just decided not to worry about the realism.
Realism in a movie about giant alien robots.
Well,
I know.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, it's a valid point.
It is. Okay, but we got to talk about the Autobots themselves. I mean, they're the heart of the film, right? But the critique argues that while they're supposed to be these distinct characters, Some of them just get lost in the shuffle.
They become almost one-dimensional.
Yeah, like Ironhide's the tough, gruff one. Jazz is the cool one.
And Bumblebee's the cute one, at least for a while.
It's like they each get one defining trait and that's it.
Which makes you wonder, can you really have a compelling character arc for a giant robot who turns into a car? It's a tough writing challenge.
It is a challenge.
It really is. And it's not to say that it can't be done, but the critique does raise some valid points about how much depth we actually get from these characters.
That's a good point. All right, so before we dive deeper into the character development of giant alien robots, okay, so we're back and ready to go even deeper on this Transformers critique. And something's been bugging me.
What's that?
The movie, it's all about these giant robots and explosions, right? But it barely touches on, like, the human cost of it all.
You're right. And the critique actually addresses that. It points out how the military, while definitely present throughout the film, feels more like, a plot device than a realistic portrayal of how we might actually react to something like this.
Yeah. Like, remember that scene we talked about? They're trying to call for backup during a full-blown robot invasion, and the operator wants a credit card number?
Right, exactly.
The critique uses that scene to highlight, like, this broader issue with the movie.
Yeah.
It jumps between genuine tension and almost slapstick humor, sometimes in the same breath.
It's that tonal dissonance again. 1 minute it's soldiers facing down this unimaginable threat, and the next minute it's played for laughs.
And it makes you wonder, is it trying to be two things at once? Appeal to, like, our love of crazy action, but also humor, without fully committing to either one.
It's a juggling act, for sure.
Yeah, totally. And honestly, the movie completely skips over what happens after all this destruction. I mean, come on, giant robots just leveled a city.
Right. There's got to be more to it than just a quick cleanup montage.
Exactly. It's like it never happened. Yeah. But the critique argues that, glossing over those consequences, it actually lessens the impact of the story.
Because if we don't see the human cost, do we really grasp the stakes? Think about it. Global panic, the economic fallout, the sheer trauma of realizing we're not alone in the universe.
Okay, now that's heavy stuff.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How would we as a society really deal with that kind of revelation? The movie kind of touches on the government cover-up, but even that feels very
Untidy.
Exactly, and that ties into a larger point the critique is making about the movie's message. Is it trying to say something profound about humanity and technology, or is it just a fun, explosion-filled escape from reality?
Not that there's anything wrong with a little escapism, but when you have a movie about giant alien robots coming to Earth, you got to at least consider the implications, right?
Absolutely. And the critique isn't saying it's a bad movie because of this, but it does encourage us, the viewers, to be more than just passive watchers. We should engage with it, analyze it, and maybe even challenge our own assumptions about storytelling.
Challenge accepted. It makes me want to go back and watch Transformers with a more critical eye,
Yeah.
See what I missed the first time around.
And that's what a good deep dive should do. It's not about ruining the fun, but adding new layers to the experience.
100%. Okay, we've talked about the human side, the military, but what about the stars of the show? The robots themselves.
Yes. And the critique actually uses them to talk about character development, or in this case, the lack thereof, in big action movies.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it argues that while the Autobots are supposed to be these distinct, characters with personalities and all that, some of them just feel more like caricatures.
Yeah, like you said earlier, Ironhide's the tough one, Jazz is cool. It's like they each get one defining trait.
Exactly. And the critique points out that this lack of depth, it extends to the Decepticons, too. Besides Megatron, and we already discussed his whole deal.
Yeah, not the most convincing villain.
They mostly blend together, so it makes you wonder, how do you make a giant robot relatable? That's got to be a tough thing to write.
Right. It's not like they could just pour their hearts out over a cup of coffee. They're giant robots.
Exactly. And look, the critique isn't offering any easy solutions, but it does raise important questions, like, do audiences need to connect with every single robot on an emotional level? Or is the spectacle of the action enough?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the transformations are pretty cool.
They're awesome,
Oh,
but it is something to think about, especially in a movie like this, where there is so much going on, explosions, chases, these incredible visuals.
It's easy to get swept up in it all.
Exactly. And the human element, even when it's robots, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But okay, before we get too lost in the robot revolution.
Oh, we're back. And wow, this critique has really gotten me thinking about Transformers in a whole new way.
It really makes you appreciate the movie's strengths and, let's be honest, its weaknesses.
Yeah, like it sets up this huge world-changing event, but then it kind of sidesteps the really complex stuff.
Right, the human impact, the psychological fallout, all those big questions about our place in the universe. It's like it skims over the surface.
Exactly. Imagine waking up one morning and bam, giant alien robots are duking it out in your backyard.
The sheer panic. The movie touches on it, but the critique argues that it doesn't really dig deep enough.
Yeah, it focuses more on the immediate action, the spectacle of the battle, rather than the long-term consequences.
What about the rebuilding, the trauma, the struggle to make sense of it all? Those are the stories we don't really get to see.
And, it made me wonder, maybe that's why some people found the later Transformers movies so overwhelming.
They just kept upping the ante with the action, but without really exploring the human side of things.
Exactly. More explosions, bigger robots, but less heart.
It's a tough balance to strike, right? Giving audiences the action-packed spectacle they expect while also exploring those deeper themes. This critique isn't saying Transformers is a bad movie because of this, but it definitely makes you consider what's being prioritized in these blockbuster films.
Absolutely. And you know what? It makes me want to go back and watch it again. Pay attention to what's happening in the background, what they don't show us.
Exactly. Like, if this really happened, what would the impact on society be? How would different cultures react? What about the economic and political implications?
So any questions?
The critique hints at these bigger questions, but ultimately leaves it to the viewer to really wrestle with them.
And I kind of love that. It sparks a conversation that goes way beyond the movie itself. So, okay, we've done a deep dive on the first Transformers. Did the sequels ever address any of these points? Did they course correct or just double down on the spectacle?
Well, that sounds like a topic for another deep dive.
I'm in. But for now, we got to wrap things up.
Time flies when you're dissecting giant robot movies.
It really does. So if you're listening out there and you've seen Transformers, we want to know, what did you think? Did it make you question things, spark your curiosity? Or were you too busy enjoying the ride? Let us know. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.